power. In the wrong hands, it can destroy lives, crush spirits, and silence those who dare to resist. Jordan Taylor, a name you might not know yet, walked into his office every day with pride, with purpose. A model employee. Loyal, diligent, and above all, hopeful. He believed in the value of hard work, the promise of fairness, and the idea that respect was earned through effort. But belief alone could never prepare him for what lay ahead. To his colleagues, Jordan was the dependable one, the quiet force, who never sought recognition, but always delivered results. His presence was steady, almost comforting, in a workplace where ambition often overshadowed humanity. Yet, in a single, shattering moment, everything he thought he knew about loyalty, integrity, and fairness would be called into question. The day began like any other, the hum of keyboards, the murmur of conversations, and the ever-present tension of deadlines. Jordan, as usual, was at his desk before most arrived, reviewing figures for a project that was days from completion. His contributions had already earned praise from clients, but those same achievements would soon become irrelevant in the face of something far more insidious. In the corner office sat Mr. Carter, a man who wielded authority with an iron grip. To the untrained eye, he was the picture of professionalism, tailored suits, polite smiles, and a commanding voice that filled every room. But behind the polished exterior lay a pattern, one that most had either ignored or feared to challenge. It was a pattern of quiet exclusion, of calculated dismissals, of making people like Jordan feel small, unwelcome, invisible. For months, Jordan had noticed the subtle shifts, the way his ideas were dismissed in meetings, the way credit for his work often found its way to someone else, the way Carter's gaze lingered just a little too long when addressing him, as though assessing not his capabilities but his place. Jordan told himself it was nothing, that hard work would speak louder than prejudice, that if he just kept his head down and excelled, he'd overcome whatever unseen force was holding him back. But on that day, everything changed. It happened suddenly, almost cruelly casual. A brief meeting called without notice. A few choice words from Carter, laced with fake concern but devoid of sincerity. And then the blow: your services are no longer needed. The words hung in the air, cold and final, like the slamming of a cell door. In that moment, Jordan's world shifted. The murmurs of his colleagues stopped, their eyes darting away, as though afraid to meet his. The shame wasn't his to bear, but it was placed squarely on his shoulders. The accusations were vague, the reasoning flimsy, but the outcome was clear. Jordan was out. He stood there, frozen, as Carter's voice carried on, citing performance issues that didn't exist, claiming a lack of team fit that had never been mentioned before. And then it was over. No goodbyes. No acknowledgement of years of dedication. Just silence, broken only by the sound of Jordan gathering his belongings under the watchful eyes of security. This was more than a firing. It was an erasure, a deliberate attempt to make him disappear, to render his contributions meaningless. But what Carter didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that this was not the end of Jordan's story. It was the beginning. Jordan left the office that day with more than his possessions in hand. He carried something Carter could never take away, the truth. And the truth has a way of finding light, no matter how deeply others try to bury it. What followed was a battle, one that would test Jordan's resolve, push him to the brink, and ultimately force a reckoning that no one could have seen coming. This is the story of a man who refused to be silenced, a fight against power, and a justice long overdue. To understand the weight of Jordan Taylor's journey, we must first see the man he was before everything changed. For years, Jordan was the kind of employee every company dreams of, punctual, reliable, and endlessly resourceful. He was the glue that held projects together, the quiet problem solver who made others shine while asking for little in return. Jordan joined the company fresh out of college, armed with ambition and a strong belief in the promise of hard work. He quickly gained a reputation for his meticulous attention to detail and his ability to navigate even the most demanding deadlines. Clients often singled him out in their feedback, praising his professionalism and the seamless execution of complex projects. But Jordan's contributions didn't end at the office. Outside those corporate walls, he was a devoted son, a supportive older brother, and a mentor to younger members of his community. After long hours at work, he would spend evenings helping his younger sister with her college applications or volunteering at a local youth center. It was this dual commitment to his career and his family that defined him. Despite the mounting pressures of his job, Jordan never lost his calm demeanor. Even when faced with challenges, he approached each day with quiet resilience, driven by a simple yet profound goal: to create a better future for his family and to prove that integrity and hard work could prevail. But not everyone shared Jordan's values. At the helm of the company was Mr. Carter, the CEO and self-proclaimed visionary leader. On paper, Carter's credentials were impressive degrees from prestigious schools, accolades for business achievements, but his leadership style told a different story. To his inner circle, Carter was charming, strategic, and always in control. But to those who worked beneath him, he was something else entirely. He was a man who saw people not as individuals, but as tools to be used or discarded. His favoritism was blatant, often leaning toward those who shared his background or perspective. Subtle microaggressions punctuated his interactions with others, the kind that left no trace on paper but stung just the same. Jordan had felt it before the slight hesitation in Carter's voice when addressing him, the way his achievements were downplayed while lesser contributions by others were celebrated. He had dismissed these moments as unintentional, choosing to focus on his work. But as time passed, the pattern became harder to ignore. The tension came to a head during a routine staff meeting. Carter, pacing at the front of the room with his usual air of authority, was addressing the team about a project that had hit a minor snag. It was a mistake, a small oversight that could have been resolved with little issue. But instead, Carter chose to place the blame squarely on Jordan. "This delay," Carter said, his voice sharp, "is unacceptable." "Jordan, care to explain?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Jordan, who sat stunned. He knew the error wasn't his. The data in question had been handled by another team. But Carter's tone left no room for discussion. Gathering his composure, Jordan spoke calmly. "Actually, Mr. Carter, the issue originated in logistics. I flagged it last week and forwarded the details to the team for resolution." Carter's expression hardened. "Are you saying this isn't your responsibility?" His voice carried an edge that silenced any murmurs from the room. Jordan hesitated. He knew the truth, but he also knew how dangerous it could be to challenge Carter directly. "What I'm saying," he replied carefully, "is that I've done everything within my role to address it." Carter didn't respond immediately. Instead, he fixed Jordan with a long, piercing stare, as if deciding how far to push. "Well, clearly it wasn't enough," he said finally, his tone dripping with finality. The meeting continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Jordan remained silent, his mind racing. He had stood his ground, but at what cost? For the first time, he realized that no amount of effort or evidence could shield him from Carter's bias. What Jordan couldn't have known was that this moment was just the beginning. The forces aligning against him were far more deliberate than he imagined. And the events of that day would set off a chain reaction that would change everything. In the weeks that followed the staff meeting, a quiet storm began to form around Jordan. On the surface, little had changed. He still arrived early, stayed late, and delivered results that spoke for themselves. But beneath the surface, something else was at work. Small details started to shift, details Jordan couldn't ignore. Reports he submitted would mysteriously go missing, only to resurface marked with errors that weren't his. Meetings were scheduled without him, critical decisions made in his absence. And then there were the whispers, brief conversations that stopped the moment he entered the room. Glances exchanged between colleagues that spoke volumes without a word. What Jordan didn't know was that Mr. Carter had already decided his fate. For Carter, Jordan was more than an inconvenience. He was a challenge to the control Carter believed he deserved. And in Carter's world, challenges were not tolerated. The plan was simple, calculated, and ruthless. A narrative was crafted, one that painted Jordan not as the dedicated professional he was, but as someone unreliable, difficult, and unwilling to take responsibility. Carter didn't need proof, he just needed enough doubt. In a closed-door meeting with HR, Carter laid the groundwork. "I've been monitoring Jordan for months," he claimed, his voice calm and measured. "I've given him every opportunity to improve, but the pattern is clear. He's not a team player. His attitude is becoming a liability." The HR manager hesitated. "We'll need documentation to move forward," they said cautiously. Carter leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You'll have everything you need," he replied. And over the next few days, Carter delivered exactly that. Fabricated performance reviews, exaggerated accounts of minor disagreements, and even carefully chosen moments where Jordan had pushed back against unfair criticism, each framed to support Carter's version of events. The final blow came on a Friday afternoon. Jordan was called into the conference room, a space he had often associated with success, presentations, and hard-earned achievements. This time, the atmosphere was cold, the air heavy with unspoken finality. Across the table sat Carter and the HR manager. Carter's expression was unreadable, his tone clipped and businesslike. "Jordan, we've reviewed your performance, and it's clear there's a misalignment between your work and the company's expectations." Jordan's heart sank. "A misalignment?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with disbelief. "Can you be specific?" Carter didn't flinch. "This isn't about specifics," he replied smoothly. "It's about patterns. Patterns that show you're not meeting the standards we require." The words were rehearsed, carefully chosen to leave no room for argument. Jordan knew the truth. There were no patterns, no failures, no real justification. But Carter had the upper hand, and he wielded it with precision. Minutes later, Jordan found himself standing at his desk, security waiting nearby as he packed his belongings. His colleagues watched in stunned silence, their faces a mix of sympathy, fear, and helplessness. For many of them, the truth was clear. They had seen Jordan's dedication, his tireless work ethic, and his contributions to the team. But they also knew the risks of speaking out. In a culture ruled by fear, silence often felt like the safer choice. Jordan carried his box of belongings through the office one last time, his head held high despite the humiliation. The weight of what had just happened bore down on him, but so did something else, a quiet, unshakable resolve. He stepped into the elevator, the doors closing behind him with a finality that felt suffocating. But as he descended, a thought began to form. He wouldn't let this be the end. He wouldn't let Carter's lies define him. Outside the building, the city buzzed with life, oblivious to the battle Jordan had just lost. He looked back at the office one last time, the place where he had poured years of effort and hope, and then turned away. If Carter thought this was over, he was wrong. Jordan didn't have all the answers yet. But one thing was certain: he would fight back. He would find the truth, expose the lies, and reclaim the dignity that had been stolen from him. This wasn't just about his job. It was about justice. Leaving the office that day was the hardest moment of Jordan's career. But as he walked away, the humiliation began to give way to something stronger: purpose. He had lost his job, but not his principles. And now he had a mission to expose the truth. Jordan's first step was to seek guidance. After hours of searching and cold calls, he connected with someone who could help: Olivia Grant, a lawyer with a reputation for fearlessly taking on cases of workplace discrimination. Olivia had spent years fighting for justice in a system designed to protect those in power, and when Jordan told her his story, she listened intently, her pen flying across the notepad. "We'll need evidence," she said firmly. "Emails, documents, anything that can prove a pattern of bias or wrongdoing. And we'll need testimonies, people who can corroborate what you've been through." Jordan got to work. Night after night, he pored over years of emails, project files, and performance reviews. Each document told a story not just of his accomplishments, but of the subtle ways Carter had tried to undermine him. Emails where Carter had dismissed Jordan's ideas without explanation. Reports where others were credited for Jordan's work. And then there were the performance evaluations, vague, inconsistent, and riddled with contradictions. But Jordan knew he needed more than paper trails. He reached out to former colleagues, people who had worked under Carter before moving on. At first, the responses were hesitant. Many feared retaliation or didn't want to revisit their experiences. But one by one, the stories began to surface. A former project manager recounted how Carter had overlooked her for a promotion, citing team dynamics that were never explained. An IT specialist described how Carter had made offhand comments about certain employees needing to work twice as hard to prove themselves. Each story added weight to Jordan's case, painting a picture of a workplace where discrimination wasn't overt but deeply embedded. Meanwhile, Carter wasn't idle. Word began to spread through industry circles, whispers that Jordan was difficult to work with, or that his firing was due to serious performance issues. These rumors, carefully planted, threatened to tarnish Jordan's reputation and close doors before they even opened. For Jordan, the financial strain was mounting. Job prospects were slim, and with bills piling up, the weight of his decision to fight back grew heavier. But he wasn't alone. His family, friends, and even former colleagues who believed in him rallied around, offering support and encouragement. His younger sister set up a crowdfunding campaign to help with legal expenses, and the outpouring of donations and messages of support gave Jordan the strength to keep going. With Olivia's help, Jordan's case began to take shape. The lawsuit was filed, alleging wrongful termination and racial discrimination. It wasn't just about his job, it was about holding Carter and the company accountable. The filing sent shockwaves through the office, and whispers of Jordan's fight began to reach the media. Local journalists picked up the story first, intrigued by the details of the case. But it didn't take long for larger outlets to take notice. Headlines began to emerge. Former employee sues for racial discrimination. A battle against corporate power. For the first time, the narrative began to shift. Carter, once untouchable, found himself under scrutiny. Reporters began digging into his history, uncovering past complaints that had been quietly dismissed. And for Jordan, the public attention was both a blessing and a burden. His story was out there for the world to see, but with it came criticism, doubt, and the weight of expectation. As the media coverage grew, so did the stakes. The company released a statement denying all allegations, framing Jordan as a disgruntled former employee seeking revenge. But Olivia was ready. She presented the evidence Jordan had gathered, emails, documents, and testimonies that painted a starkly different picture. Each piece of evidence was a step closer to the truth, and with every revelation, Jordan's determination grew. This wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about ensuring no one else would have to endure what he had. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time it felt like justice might be within reach. The courtroom was filled with an electric tension, the kind that comes when justice teeters on a knife's edge. On one side sat Jordan, composed but resolute, alongside Olivia, his lawyer, who had spent months building an airtight case. On the other side was Mr. Carter, flanked by the company's high-powered legal team, his expression betraying none of the confidence he once carried. As the trial began, Olivia wasted no time. She painted a vivid picture of Jordan's contributions to the company, detailing his stellar track record and the unjust treatment he endured. "This isn't just about a single incident," she declared to the jury. "It's about a pattern, a culture of bias and discrimination allowed to thrive unchecked." The first witnesses were former employees, people who had once worked under Carter and had their own stories to tell. Each one spoke with a mix of caution and courage, recounting experiences that mirrored Jordan's. "He always had a way of making you feel less than," one witness said, her voice trembling slightly. "He'd dismiss my ideas in meetings, but later someone else would suggest the same thing, and he'd praise them." A former manager added, "I left the company because of the environment he created. If you weren't part of his inner circle, you were invisible or worse." The testimonies were damning, each one a thread in the tapestry of evidence Olivia was weaving. But the turning point came when Olivia called a current employee to the stand, a nervous but determined junior staffer, who still worked under Carter. "Mr. Carter made it clear who he valued," the staffer said, glancing nervously at Carter before continuing. "I've seen him target employees unfairly, especially those who don't look like him. And there was one meeting where he said something I'll never forget." The courtroom fell silent. He said, "Some people just don't belong in positions of power, they're better off in supporting roles." Everyone knew who he was talking about. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, Jordan's testimony. Calm and articulate, he detailed his experiences with Carter, from the microaggressions to the fabricated accusations that led to his firing. But the most powerful moment came when Olivia introduced a piece of evidence that Carter had never expected to surface: a recording. "Your Honor," Olivia said, "this recording, taken during a private meeting, captures Mr. Carter in his own words." The audio played, Carter's voice unmistakable. His tone was condescending, dismissive, and unapologetically biased. The words were clear, leaving no room for interpretation. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the weight of the evidence sank in. In the closing arguments, Olivia didn't just advocate for Jordan, she called for accountability. "This case isn't just about my client," she said. "It's about sending a message that discrimination, no matter how insidious, will not be tolerated." The jury deliberated for hours, but when they returned, the verdict was clear. They ruled in favor of Jordan, awarding him a substantial settlement for wrongful termination and emotional distress. But more than that, the court ordered the company to undergo mandatory reforms, including anti-discrimination training and the establishment of a whistleblower protection program. The fallout was swift. Carter was fired from his position, his reputation in shambles. The company, now under intense public scrutiny, released a statement acknowledging its failures and committing to meaningful change. For Jordan, the victory was bittersweet. The settlement gave him the financial security he had lost, but more importantly, it restored his dignity. And as news of the verdict spread, it inspired others to come forward with their own stories, sparking a broader conversation about workplace discrimination. Justice had been served, not just for Jordan, but for everyone who had ever faced the same struggle in silence. And while the fight wasn't over, this was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the truth has a way of coming to light. With the trial behind him, Jordan stood at a crossroads. The settlement was more than just financial compensation, it was an opportunity. And Jordan, true to his nature, saw it as a chance to create something meaningful. Using the settlement money, he launched his own business, a company built on principles of fairness, respect, and inclusivity. The workplace he created was everything Carter's had not been. A space where people of all backgrounds could thrive, where voices were heard, and talent was recognized regardless of race, gender, or status. Jordan's business flourished, attracting employees who shared his vision and clients who valued his integrity. For Jordan, this was more than a professional triumph, it was a personal victory. He had turned his pain into purpose, proving that even the darkest moments could lead to brighter futures. Meanwhile, Carter's fall from grace was swift and unforgiving. His name had become synonymous with discrimination, a cautionary tale in corporate circles. Job offers were non-existent, his once unshakable confidence reduced to regret and bitterness. But for Jordan, it wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Carter's struggles were his own to bear, a consequence of his actions. For Jordan, the true victory was knowing that his fight had sparked change not just for himself, but for others who might have faced similar battles. This story, the narrator continues, isn't just about one man's fight for justice. It's about the power of perseverance, the courage to speak out, and the belief that truth will always prevail. And to you, the viewers, let Jordan's journey be a reminder, standing up to injustice isn't easy. It takes strength, resilience, and a willingness to endure. But as this story shows, the rewards are worth it. So, what can we do? We can learn, we can speak out, and most importantly, we can support one another in the fight for fairness and equality. If Jordan's story inspired you, don't let it end here. Hit that like button to share his victory, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that reveal the power of justice and the resilience of the human spirit. Your support helps us continue to tell stories like this, stories that deserve to be heard. Together we can shine a light on injustice and create a world where fairness prevails.